Welcome to the April 6th meeting on the APAC time cycle of the Kubernetes IoT Edge working group. We've only got one item on the agenda last I looked, and that was something I added where I wanted to discuss the secure device onboard project that's part of LF Edge. But if anybody else wants to add anything, we'll probably have time. I've been researching the secure device onboard because I anticipate trying to make that part of this working group's maintainer track session for device and onboard and management at KubeCon Europe. So I just wanted to recount the experience I've been having, and then maybe other people have played around with it a bit and have something else to add. So I went over to, the thing is in a GitHub repo under LF Edge. It's packaged as a number of components. I believe they're all written in Java and uses a Maven build process. They describe prerequisites of loading a JDK, loading Maven. There was some other project I can't remember that has to do with coming up with a better random number generator for improved security. You load all of these, and then you have the option of either building these components at a command line or within Docker containers. One thing that I found was that it is fairly resource intensive. So I started out running this thing in a VM only to find that my disk filled up and I had to go and start over. It also has a period where it has, for a short term, it's pretty demanding of CPUs and memory. So they don't really document it, but if any of you wanted to follow in my footsteps, I suggest at least 2 CPU cores and 4 gig of RAM in that VM. And I don't know that it needs this much, but when I got it to work, I gave it a VM with 100 gig of disk space, and that ran to completion, and it's nowhere near full. So, that's my story of getting it on. And then I've got the thing running now, and takes a while to start up. Like I'd say it took a good 20 minutes before it was reported on the air. Now this is the whole of the secure device onboard, including that rendezvous service. So the way this works is that manufacturers would manufacture a device and put kind of lay down an initial footprint of something that's to be completed by a distribution chain and finally a customer. And it talks to this rendezvous service, which I think in general would be hosted on the internet, but according to the docs, you could run that entirely privately if you wanted to. And like I say, I'm at the stage where I ran the test script from Secure Device Onboard that purports to simulate onboarding a device, and it worked. This runs entirely on the single Linux box, so it isn't really an actual device that connected over the network. And I got to the stage where I wanted to see something a little more realistic, like I've got a number of Raspberry Pis and even some low-end x86 edge devices that I wanted to try as a guinea pig for this. And I found that the documentation didn't really cover that you were led down into the arm of the source code that deals with manufacturer onboarding, and kind of, it's almost like the source code is the docs. It wasn't quite that bad. There is a README file, but there wasn't much there. So then I went exploring on YouTube, because often people, when they're trying to promote these open source projects and build a community will have some public facing presentations. And in fact, an Intel person gave a presentation to our group about a year ago, and it was a very good presentation, and that one's recorded. But I was kind of surprised that there weren't that many of them out there, maybe a dozen, some of them several years old. So at that point, I began to question whether the information is still good. They date back to the history before it was even put under LF Edge. So at one time, this was primarily an Intel project, then it went over to FIDO Alliance. And then today, I think it's still attached to FIDO Alliance, but mainly under LF Edge is where most of it lives. After doing that YouTube exploration, I, interestingly enough, stumbled upon a video from the Open Horizon project that covered their support for secure device onboard. And it led me to the Open Horizon GitHub repo. And they have a much easier to understand onboarding example of onboarding a generic Linux VM. And I think I found a video of somebody onboarding a Raspberry Pi. And I just discovered that information in the last 24 hours. So I haven't had a chance to go actually try to follow and reproduce what is in the video and the documentation. But like I say, it looks pretty straightforward, well documented, and I intend to do that. So that's kind of where I am right now with that secure device onboard. Just kind of curious whether either of you have had any experience or even heard of people doing things with that.
Yeah, I played around with it a little bit a couple years back and fell into similar issues of finding the code being the documentation. When you're saying you're onboarding or getting to the point where you're onboarding a Raspberry Pi, are you having to like host the manufacturing certificate chain service because it's not being shipped with the certificate inside the device, right? For the Raspberry
Right.
Pis?
I think there's a way you can generate a manufacturing certificate. And I found docs that would, I haven't actually done it, but it seems to describe how you would go about it. And then under Open Horizon, they had another note saying that it's possible to use Intel's rendezvous service. So they apparently have one running on the internet, and you can register potentially. I don't know if it's registering as a developer or as a manufacturer, but they have a process for doing it. So apparently you could potentially use the Intel one. I'm not sure that would support a Pi. I don't know how picky this is in terms of architecture. It seems to me like it wouldn't be in Intel's business interest necessarily to take it that far, but certainly if you were on an x86 platform, I could see why they do it. So like I say, I've discovered docs related to it, but I haven't gone there yet. I did register for an account with Intel, but you fill out a form and then it says they'll get back to you. So I have a feeling that they are likely to greenlight me because I used my VMware creds, and I think we have a pretty good relationship with Intel in general, so that I would be surprised if they didn't give me access, but who knows? We'll find out. And I'm not sure how quickly to expect a response back, but the advantage there would be that you're using their hosted rendezvous server. But I think, as far as I can tell, I've got one up and running in my home lab. I haven't exposed it out on the internet, but I think I could if I wanted to.
Yeah.
Right now, it's just only in the network inside my house, but.
It's certainly interesting to hear that you're running into like documentation issues, which is similar to what I had 2 years ago. And I feel like SDO has gotten a lot more visibility, and it's got the support of LF Edge. So I wonder if they have some work underway to better document that.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd even go so far as to call it an issue rather than just, an observation, because I did find in their project an official statement that they intended I've seen projects before where the only spec is the code, which I don't like, but they specifically made a statement that they want to move fast, so that, that they called out the possibility of there being some projects that start with documentation in a spec first, followed by an implementation, but they wanted to get right into experimenting with implementations. And, if that's a conscious decision that the foundation running this presumably had a vote on, I can see that. I mean, it's not horribly unreasonable. There's plenty of startups that would run in the maybe non-open source mode that would be the exactly the behavior you'd expect. And I can maybe appreciate that it maybe isn't embracing of a broad community of anybody who wants to come along to rapidly pick it up. But in terms of getting movement done quickly, maybe that's the way to go. And unless as only an observer not contributing to the work, I don't know how much of an opinion I'm entitled to have saying, hey, you people are doing it wrong. I mean, really, to have a vote, you got to be willing to show up and do some of the heavy lifting too. And right now, I'm in the mode where I'm undecided, but I really can't find anything that looks any better out there either. And they seem to be getting momentum. So they say, I saw evidence that Open Horizon has gone that direction. The old EdgeX Foundry also has things in their GitHub repo that imply they're supporting it, but it wasn't as well written as the Open Horizon. So I think that my next step is to play around with the Open Horizon. I'll end up learning that too, and I have nothing against it. I'm almost like still trying to form an opinion as to what I think about that too. So whatever will get me there, as kind of dip my toe in the water and see how it feels, is kind of the stage I'm at. But
I remember Portainer, who presented also in the working group, also uses SDO.
Okay. I'll look at that. I've become, since that presentation, sort of a Portainer fan. So I've got stuff running myself using Portainer, but obviously not with SDO. And
Steve, I just looked, the SDO folks were on one of the calls, and we have a presentation from them also here, so it might help.
Yeah, about a year ago, they gave a full hour-long presentation. It was very good. It really went more into what it could do, though, not the hands-on demo. And I'm kind of at the stage where I want to, I want to actually use it. And the other thing we could do is ask them. But at this point, I'm on a crash course to learn it, to try to integrate coverage of it into my presentation at KubeCon. So I don't really have time for, I've got time to spend on it as part of what I intend to present at KubeCon. And I'm okay with not presenting myself as an expert, just kind of like a person in the streets experience with trying to learn it. I think that's valuable to others too. So if that's what I end up reporting on, that, hey, I went to these places, and kind of, if I could get it working, I could almost see, maybe if time would allow, of bundling up some stuff and maybe trying to even do a demo, or if the demo doesn't fit, in a reasonable amount of time, maybe I can record one and integrate it into part of the presentation, or just use it at KubeCon as kind of hallway track or something. The equipment I'm using, I can easily put in a backpack. So, a legit IoT scenario would encompass something like, a very small form factor Pi or x86 small form factor system that you could just run on a tabletop.
Yeah. I found that when I was working on it a couple of years ago, I think I just emailed one of the folks that were on one of the documentation, and they set up a call with us to like debug things personally. So I feel like even the folks who presented at the working group might be willing to just set up a call, even for just like 20 minutes. And you could say, hey, like I've gotten this far. I think this time would
Yeah.
help kickstart it a little more. I do you think it'd be cool after doing all this work, like maybe writing a blog or something about it so that someone
Yeah, I
else
think you're
could
right.
do the repro? Because I mean, even just your search shows that everyone wants to get started with it, but it's really hard to know the exact steps to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, at this stage, I'm not at the call for help thing because I just have not, I'm just, as long as I don't get blocked,
Mhm.
if I kind of my personality, I think, is if I've made progress in the last hour, then I'm just going to just keep pushing on it. And so far it's been like that, where some of it is a little slow. Like it's been ages since I did Java builds. And, you get used to kind of different development platforms and how long they can take. And all I can say is it's been a while for me since um, disembarking into the pure Java world and I don't know, learning experience. I did, by
Yeah.
the way, find some other thing that really was just a press release, but I saw some press release out of a startup that contended they were potentially combining secured device onboard with WebAssembly, and which sounded interesting. But then when I couldn't find anything beyond just what was in this press release, and then they didn't appear to have any open source. So I gave up on that.
Yeah, interesting. I wonder if the WebAssembly would be, for my memory of SDO, you have to have a client implementation on the device that's being onboarded. And so maybe they implemented the client side in WebAssembly, like maybe they somehow compiled the Java or rewrote it in like C or Rust so that it was smaller and could go on smaller devices. That'd be interesting. Or the rendezvous service, maybe that was WebAssembly.
Yeah, the rendezvous service, I think, since I believe you really only have to have one. Now, maybe you would load balance it for redundancy because it would be potentially critical. But that's kind of like the anticipation, I think, is it's cloud hosted, or if you had an air gapped on-prem, it still would probably be kind of in a richly provisioned gateway scenario where you had a lot of equipment as opposed to the edge device itself. So I don't think it has to be that thin, and it's running a full database behind it to keep it state. And then you really are going to need to back up the database because this is like if you lose some of the certs and keys in there, you're probably going to have a really bad day. So
Mhm.
that one probably isn't going to be a small, low resource deployment for the actual rendezvous service.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm curious, rolling back to when we were talking about the manufacturing certificates, how you could generate that service. Do you think that's a prevailing scenario or is that demo only? Because my understanding would be you would have like a formal manufacturer provide the original certificate. It kind of builds up the certificate chain. But do you think these scenarios of like having a Raspberry Pi and creating your own certificate will become one, or it'll more be like the manufacturers of Raspberry Pis will start to support SDO?
Um, I don't know. I don't know if the manufacturers of a Pi would, but to be honest, I think when it comes to production grade edge, a lot of people dream of it literally being a Pi. And I keep hearing war stories of people who tried to use a Pi, and tried to deploy using SD-RAM cards and things like that, only to find out that the actual durability at scale leaves much to be desired. So you want to spend just a little more money to get
Mhm.
something, a little more rigorous for that use case. So I'm not sure that it literally is something coming out of the Pi Foundation,
Yeah.
other than something Pi-like. If you kind of crept up a little bit in pricing, and I think you almost want to creep up a little bit to get off the SD-RAM card and have a legit disk, you know, an SSD or something that's a little more durable than that. It's kind of like, I think those SD-RAM cards are kind of made as throwaway consumer commodities. And you need to kind of spend a little more, that does a little more balancing of the flash memory behind it and things to get that thing to hold up in practice. Maybe the temperature spec on those Pis leaves much to be desired too. And I don't know, a higher end one, I think maybe those people are already there. What I can do is share a screen and actually show you what I was looking at.
Yeah.
This is, I'm just reading this myself, so I've been working on this today. But this is coming out of the Open Horizon project. So, and let me see where this came from. So under Open Horizon SDO support, I found that this README was easier to understand than the stuff in the SDO project itself. So in many ways, they're recounting the same sort of things, but maybe I just align with whoever the writer of this was, kind of the writer of the other ones. And they go through these steps of, you know, owner services, initializing a device, etc. And kind of it doesn't go in order. So I would think making the device would come first before an ownership transfer, right? But in this doc, the device step is way down in the middle. And they describe a mechanism for, if you don't have a physical that came that way from a manufacturer, they are publishing the script that can perform this just on a Linux VM. So you would start with a Linux VM, run this script, and apparently it turns it into, you know, kind of the equivalent of some device that came from a manufacturer. And it's a simulation. If you actually read the script that this is running, the simulate manufacturer, you can find more detail that they came up with an example manufactured certain things, but if you read the script, you can figure out how to replace that with your own. Like you could generate your own to effectively be your own manufacturer if you wanted to. And the stuff in here is accessing a rendezvous server. Let me see. Here, I'll drag over the actual script. I don't know if that font is big enough that you can actually read it.
Yeah, it's good.
But this is coming out of that same Open Horizon SDO repo. And they're going through the script. They're documenting, the script is pretty well documented. It says on a Linux VM, it simulates the steps a device manufacturer would do: device initialization, creating a manufacturer voucher, getting the voucher ready for a custody transfer to the owner, and then switching it into owner mode. And so far, I haven't tried to run this. I've just read it. So I got to this later today, but it seems fairly easy to understand. And somewhere in here, it even documents that you can either run this against the Intel rendezvous server if you get Intel to grant you an account there, or you can run your own. So, like I say, my intention is to try to follow, try to do the same thing at home in my home lab. And I didn't get stuck. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. But this isn't, I don't think I'd call this documentation, but as far as bash scripts go, it's pretty well documented for a bash script. So I haven't had any trouble thinking I understand this. You can see kind of parts of this that are involved where, you're dealing with a MariaDB database and things. So a lot of the structure for doing this, even if you were a manufacturer, I think you end up standing up a fair amount of stuff to put the components together. This isn't the only thing potentially lightweight here, I think, is the device itself. But all the supporting infrastructure that would be used by the manufacturer and the rendezvous service, those aren't necessarily lightweight. In fact, they're definitely not. And if you think about it, they probably shouldn't be, because that stuff is going to be mission critical stuff with, high availability concerns, so that you don't want to cut any corners on that. And it looks to me that what they've published stands up in Docker. So the SDO thing doesn't use Kubernetes to stand it up. It actually uses Docker Compose. But given that it's all containerized, I think somebody could probably do a Helm chart or whatever to turn it into a Kubernetes hostable thing. But in the state that it's published, it anticipates just using a Docker runtime with Docker Compose. And I suppose that's the right way to do it too, that, stay as agnostic, because it's more flexible that way, where somebody could stand it up on Kubernetes, but isn't forced to if they don't want to. And, maybe could go in different directions of a managed Kubernetes that maybe hides some of the complexity. But, I'm almost too green at this to be entitled to have an opinion. But, for whatever it's worth, I just wanted to go over what I found so far.
Yeah, this is certainly very interesting. For the certificates that for this demo here, are you supposed to create like 509 certificates, or are they, you mentioned?
Yeah, for the demo, they apparently have certificates already built. But of course, for production level, you're not going to use that. That's kind of like the sort of the equivalent of using a built-in default password to something, where,
Yeah.
For just a learning exercise, it's probably fine. I'm trying to find it, but somewhere in here, they documented the process of generating your own cert pairs. Here, is this it? Yeah, here, there's something about indicating a directory where you want your keys to be saved. So there is a process. It says you need to create 3 key pairs and import them in the container. I haven't tried to do it, so I don't know what the steps are there, but it does appear that it's documented. And once again, this is coming out of the Open Horizon project, not the Secure Device Onboard project stocks. So I don't know, at this stage, I'm prone to just go with whichever one I like best, if either one will get me there. But
Yeah, definitely.
and yeah, so that's just kind of where I sit. I don't want to tell you more than I know. So, but I think I've kind of recounted my experience in fiddling around with this part-time over the course of the last week. And this is kind of what I've learned. And I'm definitely going to be putting more time into this. So, I don't intend to give up until I've done some onboarding, even with some small piece of equipment. I don't want to, once I get to the point where you see here, it's like, do it with a test VM. I mean, if it works on a Linux VM, then I know how to get that to work on a Linux bare metal machine too. So, I think there's a high probability that I'll be able maybe to, not only demo this or record a demo, but maybe even bring one along in a backpack. And I think your idea of doing a blog post might be good. Maybe even doing a video would be good.
Yeah.
In terms of the KubeCon session, we don't want this to all be about secure device onboard. So I don't think we have time for that. A deep kind of the full end-to-end experience, including manufacturer experience with secure device onboard. That's probably an hour-long presentation or something if you were going to do an actual demo. And maybe
Yeah,
we could put that on even during a future working group meeting, you know, later in the year.
definitely. And I think kind of spending 5 to 8 minutes on it, and then linking to maybe a blog or a video recording.
Uh,
Even if like we spent, I mean, we still have like 6 weeks or whatever till KubeCon, even if we had that demo in a working group meeting, we could link to the recording of the working group as a demo instead of having to have like a formal separate demo. Yeah, and just seeing how that pairs well flow wise with like whatever demo Kilton does.
yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing for KubeCon that we have to keep in mind is this secure device onboard is almost too low for, with KubeCon, you're supposed to tie it into Kubernetes. So one approach to getting this tied to Kubernetes might be to figure out how to host the rendezvous service on Kubernetes. That might be useful to somebody. Maybe it would make it a little easier to just take the existing Docker Compose YAML file and turn it into a Helm chart or something that you bring up in Kubernetes instead of Docker Compose. But another angle would be to actually do the bootstrap, you know, simulating some user or customer bringing a raw device up in the field and ending up with it running as some sort of Kubernetes node or Kubernetes managed node.
Totally. I think that that's a common use case for a lot of these edge Kubernetes solutions like Portainer is like, oh, I want to go to Best Buy and buy my server and then immediately have it join my like edge cluster. And I want to not have to worry about the hardware. And I think SDO is very related to Kubernetes. Whether or not SDO's components itself are running on Kubernetes, I think the ease of zero touch onboarding of edge devices as nodes in a cluster is a powerful solution that we can just emphasize that even in the talk. But it would be interesting to find out, besides Portainer, other Kubernetes edge offerings that are using SDO, and that could be another way of tying it together.
So Open Horizon is one. I don't even know enough. You know, it strikes me that Open Horizon, EdgeX Foundry, and then maybe Kilton, who isn't here, but his IO Fog are sort of solutions for running containerized apps out on edge devices too. So at least two of those have some appearance of the word SDO in the repository. So they've at least thought of it. And like I say, this other one I came across mentioned it too. I believe I might have the name wrong. I think it was MINIX or something like that. And that was the one that was WebAssembly focused. But people have to be looking at this because it's an obvious problem that needs a solution. And I don't know, you know, this seems to be a leading candidate for that in the open source world. For Linux onboarding, there have been some other solutions to boot them up. In fact, Dion, I think Red Hat has some of the aspects of the Red Hat Edge stuff anticipate kind of doing the imprint of just a Linux bare metal device, right?
Yeah, there's I think OS3 project which gives you an immutable image of the operating system that you can't change, and that's their way of making sure that the device is basically centrally controlled. Let me try to find it.
Yeah, if you come across that, shoot a link my way, because if there's other things out there, we should at least mention them in the presentation. At least to the, and if it's Red Hat, it's obviously open source. Yeah, I don't feel an obligation to mention commercial solutions, but
Yeah, I think on the like smaller edge side of things, for the talk, like talking about provisioning and devices, it would be interesting to look at kind of the set of like even smaller MCU class devices and kind of what those, or at least from my perspective, what I find interesting is kind of the provisioning abilities that are built into protocols.
Mhm.
So for example, like OnVIF has like a handle for updating firmware. That's a part of its like device management, like specification for devices. And I think OPC-UA has a similar one, and kind of looking at all of those, I'd be curious, what like some of the other ones that are a little bit more generic are, like ZeroConf. I think that's interesting too, thinking about going to an even smaller level. Yeah.
Okay, well, like I say, I put this on the agenda. I'm kind of like talked out on the subject. So the floor is open. If either of you have further comments on it, go for it. Or if you have other topics you'd like to cover, or
I'll take a look at the Redcat stuff and send you over later today.
okay, sounds good. Yeah, either send it or you can just drop it in the meeting notes or whatever.
Sure.
And if nobody has anything else, we can end this just a few minutes early. I know for Kate and I, it's kind of late in the evening.
It is a little late, but it's been really interesting.
Okay, I'll take silence as nothing further. So as usual, nice chatting, and we'll catch you at the next one. And I'm sure we'll be engaging with each other on Slack too. So good night, everybody.
Bye, everyone.